Lots of great questions and comments. The main one today is on corn and treating it with ashes or lime. Thanks for joining us today on Questions and Answers with James Townsend and Son. So the first question today is from Stonewall Jackson. It's from the last Q&A that we did. He says, this may be a little outside your wheelhouse, but even if you don't know, you may have a friend who knows. Why do some depictions of powder kegs have XXX on them, and what does that mean? If it's in a powder keg context, more than likely it has to do with the grade or the granular size of the powder that's inside. So even today, if you buy black powder, it's usually graded in the F series, like 4F, 3F, 2F powder, having to do with how big the grain is. Sometimes they also had different grades of powder, as in, kind of good stuff and not so good stuff. More than likely, though, it's probably grain size. This one's from Alan Fulton. It's also on the Q&A. It says, isn't tin poisonous? And the quick answer to that would be no. In its metallic state, it is not poisonous. It's used all the time to coat tinware and other things to make the other metals not reactive. It's one of those metals that is less reactive and not harmful for people. Here's an interesting question. It's Marion Witt. It's from the Whipped Syllabub episode. And the question is, lemons? 18th century? Yes, lemons are very 18th century. You see them all the time in English cookbooks from the 18th century. And if you look in, say, advertisements for ships that are coming in North America in the 18th century, lemons are one of those things that gets imported. They might be something expensive. Maybe you needed a lot of money to buy lemons, but they certainly were available. This one's from the Standing Crust Pie episode. It's Caitlin Rodriguez. She says, if I were to bake this with apple pie filling, would I have to pre-cook the dough? Like you did with a bigger standing pie? Well, anytime you're going to use a bigger standing pie, you're probably going to have to pre-cook it to give it some internal strength. But as for the first part of this question, with an apple pie filling, I doubt this would work well with an apple pie filling. Generally with fruit pies and sweet pies, they would use a short paste and they would bake them in probably a pie pan or a tart tin. This one's Stefanos 2691. It's from the Seasoning Cast Iron episode that a lot of people refer to for seasoning their cast ironware. That's fantastic information I needed to know. I got two questions. Can you please tell me how often we should season cast iron cookware, and is the kitchen going to smell because of the smoke afterwards? And how often you season really has to do with how often you use the item and how much wear that seasoning gets. Generally, if you're very careful in washing it and depending on what you cook in it, you may never have to season it again. Some things it basically keeps adding to the seasoning. If the seasoning gets worn or scratched, then you'll probably need to re-season it. So it all has to do with the wear and tear that the lining is getting. Is the kitchen going to smell? I guarantee it. This is a stinky process, and that oil is burning off. And so it's really best to do it outside or with your doors open so that you get lots of ventilation and that smoke doesn't linger in the house. Here's one from the Pickled Cabbage episode. This is 2014 and beyond. Whole allspice, was it available back then? Yes, allspice was available in the 17th and 18th century. You'll see it in English cooking quite often. Sometimes it's called Jamaica pepper, but it is one of those common spices you'll see. Okay, now this is from this last painting episode that we did, and there's a couple comments here. I left a kind of a question hanging in the air. There was this tool in the foreground of the painting that we couldn't quite decide what it was. And I asked the question and we got a bunch of different answers. Noble Design Media thinks that it's a shoe stretcher. Someone else, I'm not sure who it was, commented and thought it was a grouting tool. And I think somebody else thought it was a tool for cutting the tile because it's close to that area of the painting. But I think the best answer, is Kelly White, who says, I think the tool looks like what they used to dig peat blocks. And peat was a common tool or a common fuel that they would use. And Scotland is one of those places where peat is a fuel that's used. Both Ireland and other places, the Welsh would possibly use. So you find this tool called, he says, I think it's called a tusker or a turf spade. If you look at some of the pictures, especially do a Google image search on tusker and peat, and you'll find a bunch of these, and they all seem to be a little different in their design. But I believe that this one might possibly be that tool. As I look at it more and more, it's really hard to decide because some of those shoe stretchers do look like that, but I think in the context that it's probably a turf spade. If you've got a better picture or a better idea about what that is, please chime in the comments section. Here's the main question. It's from Ashley Deaton. She says, I recently read that the Spanish and Aztec used wood ash when cooking corn. Would 18th century Americans have done the same? Would they have used slaked lime? Was their corn soft enough to manage without soaking in an alkaline such as ash? So there's sort of a couple of different questions here. But I guess the main one is, did 18th century Americans use corn soaked in ashes or lime? And there's a couple of different ways of answering this. The North American Indians were definitely doing this with their corn. And we know that the 17th and 18th century Americans knew about exactly what the Indians were doing with their corn and how they were eating it. And they were adapting some of these same techniques in cooking and how to treat their corn. And so more than likely, the Americans are doing the same thing. They're making hominy. They're making corn, and they're using the ashes and the alkali to both make it into a different form of corn and to, maybe they didn't realize it, but also release some of the amino acids and things that you need to make corn actually nutritious. We know that in the early 19th century, we have American cookbooks that talk about hominy and treating it with lime and ashes. So we know that's true. So we can kind of put these things together. We don't have an 18th century American cookbook that talks about this. So there's two more little side topics here. One, she talks about the softness of the corn. They ate their corn in every stage, whether it was green or ripe but not hard yet, and then dried. All those different stages of corn were eaten. So, and some of them might have used an ash to treat them in different stages. So, I mean, it's used in all sort of stages like that. So sometimes soft, sometimes it was hard. The other thing here is that corn in the 18th century was flint corn, not like our modern dent corn that most of the corns we have today are a lot more like today's popcorn would be. So it is naturally a harder corn in its dried state. I want to thank you so much for all the amazing comments and wonderful questions. We get so much great community and conversation going on, so I would really thank you for all that, and thanks for watching. If you're a new viewer and you haven't subscribed, press the subscribe button up here. That'll take you to a spot where you can subscribe. I want to thank everyone for watching.